Hello and welcome to another episode of Down to Disness, a series where I pick a Disney animated movie and tell you about its history and its impact on pop culture and animation. In this episode, we'll be talking about The Great Mouse Detective, released in 1986. As many of you probably know, The Great Mouse Detective is basically Sherlock Holmes with mice, but more specifically, it was based off of the book series Basil of Baker Street by Eve Titus. And just like Basil is based off of Arthur Conan Doyle's character Sherlock Holmes, Rhadigan in The Great Mouse Detective is based off of his nemesis, Moriarty. Let's talk briefly about the climate at the Walt Disney Animation Studios at this time. Things were very in flux, and people like Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg had just come to Disney. The studio had just released The Black Cauldron, and it did not do very well, and so things were very up in the air for animation. Walt's nephew, Roy E. Disney, famously championed for the continuation of full-length animated feature films, as that was the studio's legacy. The Great Mouse Detective was cautiously greenlit with the condition that it be completed in just 12 months. Looking back, a lot of the team says that this very short production timeline actually created a can-do spirit and sense of camaraderie amongst the animators. And it's pretty crazy, but The Great Mouse Detective had 4 directors. And that was to ease the burden on each of the directors in order to get the movie done in just 1 year. 2 of these directors were John Musker and Ron Clements. This was their directorial debut at Disney. We have talked about so many of their movies on Down to Disness: Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Hercules, Princess and the Frog, Treasure Planet. But this was the very first one! Helping them co-direct is someone I don't think we've ever talked about on Down to Disness, Disney legend Bernie Mattinson. Bernie Mattinson started at Disney as an in-betweener in 1953 and went on to be an assistant animator on The Jungle Book and Sleeping Beauty. He worked for Disney all through the Renaissance period and still works on Disney films to this day, as recently as Ralph Breaks the Internet. And our 4th co-director was David Mcnair, who had previously written for Oliver and Company, Fox and the Hound, and The Rescuers. Another important thing to note about this time at the studios is that there was kind of a changing of the guard happening, where there was still a lot of older animators around and a lot of younger animators coming in for the first time. These were people, of course, like Musker and Clements, and animator Glenn Keane, who would all collectively help usher in the Disney Renaissance. So you have all these key players, and you have a very short production timeline, and you also have a lot riding on this movie since the last one didn't do so well, and you have to prove to the new studio heads that it is worth making animated movies. Very low pressure, right? And what definitely didn't help this pressure was growing animosity between the animators and the newly appointed VP of Walt Disney Feature Animation, Peter Schneider. Originally, this movie was going to be called Basil of Baker Street, but it was Peter Schneider who said that Great Mouse Detective would be a better title. The animators weren't super happy about that. One animator decided to pull a prank and sent a memo out company-wide under the name Peter Schneider. It was a list stating that they were going to rename past titles in the same way that they had renamed Basil of Baker Street. On the list of new movie titles was 7 Little Men Help a Girl, The Girl with the See-Through Shoes, Puppies Taken Away, 2 Dogs Fall in Love, and Robin Hood with Animals. Peter Schneider was apparently very mad about this and wanted to find out who had written the memo so he could fire them, but everybody else covered for them and he never found out who wrote it. Moving on, one thing that The Great Mouse Detective is always praised for is having an excellent Disney villain. Rhadigan is probably one of the most interesting parts of the film and one of the most well-performed characters, and he is voiced by the famous Vincent Price. Price did the speaking and singing role of Rhadigan, and he says that he had always wanted to voice a Disney character, and his dream came true. Alan Young did the voice of Flaversham, however you want to say it, and he famously had already been doing the voice of Scrooge McDuck, most notably in Mickey's Christmas Carol. Fidget, the bat, who, can we talk 1 second about the opening scene of this movie where Fidget kidnaps Flaversham and how truly horrifying the sequence is? Yeah. Terrifying. Fidget was voiced by very famous voice actor and Disney veteran Candy Candido. Candido had voiced roles in many Disney films previous to The Great Mouse Detective, including one of the Horned King's guards, one of Maleficent's goons in Sleeping Beauty, the Chief in Peter Pan, and Brutus and Nero in The Rescuers. Unfortunately, this would be Candido's last role with Disney, and he passed away 13 years later in 1999. The last character I want to mention briefly is Dawson, who was voiced by Val Benton. The character of Dawson was actually based on legendary Disney animator and one of the original 9 Old Men, Erik Larsen. Erik Larsen had set up his own training program for young animators, and many of his students actually ended up working on The Great Mouse Detective. And as a tribute to Erik Larsen, his students modeled Dawson after their beloved teacher. Glenn Keane said that there were striking parallels between Larsen and the character of Dr. Dawson. They're both kind-spirited and have gentle personalities. Now, this movie technically is a musical, although there aren't very many memorable musical numbers, but there are a lot of interesting facts behind the very few musical numbers that this film has. For one, the very famous American composer Henry Mancini did the score for Great Mouse Detective, and you would know him from his work writing the Pink Panther theme. Yep. As I mentioned, Vincent Price sang for Rhadigan, and he got 2 villain songs, technically. World's Greatest Criminal Mind and Goodbye So Soon, the one that plays while Basil and Dawson are tied up gonna die. And then you have Let Me Be Good to You, a song sung by a cabaret/burlesque dancing mouse in a scene that could be completely removed from the movie and nothing would change. Originally they wanted Madonna to sing this song for the movie, but they thought that was maybe too contemporary of a choice. The song ended up being performed by Melissa Manchester, and the scene was almost cut for being too risque, too sexy of a mouse. The animators argued and won by saying that it was a cabaret-style song and the lyrics were harmless, and anyway, it was performed by a mouse and no one should think a mouse is too sexy. As we've discussed many times before in this series, at Disney there was a progression from 2D animation to CGI animation, and while that was happening, there was a meshing of the two mediums. Great Mouse Detective was not the first Disney movie to combine CGI animation with 2D hand-drawn animation, but it was the first one to do it extensively. The Clocktower Scene in the finale of this movie was the first extensive use of CGI animation with 2D characters put into a CGI background. With the use of computers, they were able to create a 3D set to put their characters in and move a camera around as if they were in a physical space. It was the first time an animated movie was able to have a Steadicam type shot, and the scene is still really impressive to this day. If you go back and watch the Clocktower Scene, it's really crazy that they're able to have the camera fly over the set and these characters and add to the drama of the finale. So in the end, they did it. They made The Great Mouse Detective in just 12 months on a $10 million budget, and the film ended up grossing $40 million at the box office, which isn't a lot, but it's a lot compared to their budget. And while it didn't save the studio in the way that Cinderella saved the studio by being a huge box office success, it is still very fair and correct to say that The Great Mouse Detective saved the studio. All these things that I've been mentioning about how the studio was in flux. You have these new heads of the studio who aren't sure about the future of animation. You have Roy E. Disney fighting for the legacy of animated features. You have older animators leaving and newer animators coming in. This was all the match. These things created the match that lit the fire of the Disney Renaissance. The Disney Renaissance technically starts with The Little Mermaid, but it would be very fair to say that the Disney Renaissance would not have happened without Great Mouse Detective. The Great Mouse Detective proved that full-length animated feature films were still a viable option for the Walt Disney Company. There are so many elements of the film that you can see leading to the beauty of the Disney Renaissance. You have great music, you have beautiful animation, and you have a willingness to innovate and try new technologies that could tell your story better. The animators took a tiny timeline and a tiny budget and made something great out of it. So show some respect, okay? Interestingly enough, Great Mouse Detective was a favorite of mine when I was a kid. I don't know why I liked watching it so much. Upon rewatching, it's honestly very terrifying at a lot of points and also slow at other points. But I loved it. Maybe it's because it's mice, maybe it's because Toby the dog is so cute. I'm grateful for it. At the end of the day, that's the feeling that I have the most about The Great Mouse Detective, is that I am grateful. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned something new about Disney history and The Great Mouse Detective, and if it's a favorite of yours, let me know why in the comments below. Also, of course, in the comments, let me know what movie you would like to see me do next on Down to Disness. I can't thank you enough for watching, and I am so happy to be here making new episodes for you guys, and I promise you will see me again very soon.